Hey folks, Nathan here. We continue our look at my favorite deck building games as we continue our look as sort of a sub-series here at the game Ascension, also known as Ascension Chronicle of the Godslayer, though again, Chronicle of the Godslayer is actually the name that is usually considered now for the first set in the series, which is sometimes referred to simply as Ascension deck building game with its third edition. This time, we look at sets 7 and 8 out of the 10 that are released so far. This time we look at Realms Unraveled and then Dawn of Champions. Now, as you may recall, as we looked at the previous pairs, 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6 in Ascension, those were released in blocks. One large set and one small set each year approximately, with each pair, each block, having some type of shared mechanics. For instance, we recently looked at Rise of Vigil and Darkness Unleashed, both of which use energy and the energize keyword, although they introduce different aspects of it as you went from one set to the other. Once we hit Realms Unraveled, though, they were done with the idea of blocks. Instead, we would see big sets only, no more of the small sets whatsoever. And some of the mechanics might carry over from one set to the next, but there was a tendency to feel like it was sort of refreshing the brand each time around. The mechanics weren't nearly as closely tied together as they had been in those previous blocks. So that brings us to set number 7, Realms Unraveled. Again, we have an included game board, which is nice because the big sets always have the game boards in them. The small sets did not. So getting rid of the small sets also meant that every set from here forward would have a new game board with it. And in this case, our game board is laid out such that we have our Void to send things that have been banished, our Portal deck or center row deck here ready to go, the honor pool, which is where we're going to put our various honor tokens to track who's going to win or what you've earned as you build towards winning with the honor in your honor tokens and the honor on your cards. We have our always available cards of the Mystic, Heavy Infantry, and Cultist set up, and then our 6 spaces there for the center row. So let's fill those up. I'll go ahead and keep the honor tokens in their bag so as to make this a little easier to manage. Realms Unraveled picks up where we left off with Darkness Unleashed. One of the most important and more innovative aspects of that game was the transform cards. But the thing was that in order to transform one card into another, or to flip over a double-sided card to its more powerful version, you had to use that energize keyword. Play energy shards, gain energy or energize, reach a certain threshold, and then you can trigger a transformation. Realms Unraveled keeps the idea of transforming cards, but because the energy shards, the whole concept of energizing is gone after that third block, they had to come up with other ways to do it, and it tends to be card specific. So rather than it being energized to a certain point and a transformation can happen, it's much more of a meet certain criteria within the game, and then a transformation can happen. So, for instance, we have this card here, Adayu. This is the god at the heart of Realms Unraveled. Adayu the Tormented. It's a monster. Defeat it. Reward. Transform this into Adayu the Serene and acquire it. So in this case, all you have to do is defeat it for 7 combat while it's out here within the center row. And when defeated, rather than being banished to the void, it goes straight to you and transforms into Adayu the Serene, which is this card here. Again, so we have another instance of taking a card that already exists, replacing it with another card based on circumstances. And just like back in Darkness Unleashed, you have a pair of cards here for this transforming one here with regular backs. This one stays out of the game until it's time to replace this one with it. This one goes into the center deck. But if you wanted to play with card sleeves, which keep one of the sides blocked, you can instead play with this one. For every transforming pair of cards, there is a double-sided card version to use with card sleeves. As noted last time, I think that's a very user-friendly way of doing this that is something that kind of goes above and beyond what we would expect the company to have to do for those transforming cards. We're also, again, given one of those little notices saying, hey, don't forget, transforming cards work a certain way, don't necessarily put everything immediately into the center deck. Along with the new mechanics that we have this time around are a few things along with some tweaks to the look of the game. We'll start with look first. You'll notice here that we have a new look in terms of card frames and in terms of our always available cards and whatnot. We have a new look for the Mystic. This is what it's stuck with since. A new look for heavy infantry. A new look for the cultist. The militia for our hand. The apprentice also for our hand. Notice no energy shards because again that mechanic is gone. Our monsters have the new updated card frames that look a lot more slick, as do our cards that we can acquire. So as of now, around the time shortly after set number 10 has been released, this is the set that gives us the new unified, cleaner, crisper look that is carried forward to today. There's also 2 other new mechanics added in, including multi-faction heroes. So we have a hero here, Nightmare Delver, and notice his type, Mechana, Void, Hero. Mechana, or Mechana, is one faction, Void is another faction. This one fits for both and can be referenced by cards that reference both. Just as we have here, an Enlightened Mechana hero, the Canon Templar, right? So between different factions, there's always been sort of a slight difference in theme of how they would play. Now we have cards that play somewhat like 2 different factions, are labeled that way, and therefore can be referenced by cards that are referencing one particular faction. For instance, if something says reference Lifebound and you've got a Lifebound Void hero, then okay, it can reference it because Lifebound is part of its multi-faction designation. We also have a new mechanic called Multi-Unite. Now, previously we had seen Unite already. Unite was basically, if you play a card that turn of a particular faction, then play a card that says Unite for that particular faction, basically you triggered an extra ability on that given card. And it didn't matter how many of that other type of card you played that it required for Unite, you only got that effect once. Now we have Multi-Unite. Gain 1 honor in this case. Gain this effect for each other Lifebound hero you play or have played this turn. So it helps to focus on one particular faction because a Multi-Unite may come out, and rather than it being, okay, I put out 5 of something and I get the Unite effect once from my card that says Unite, if I have 5 of something out and put out a Multi-Unite for that particular type of card, all of a sudden I've got 5 times of that Multi-Unite ability triggering. Could be very powerful in large groups of cards. As for the numbers, we're looking at 100 center deck cards, 50 single-sided transform cards, yes, 50 single-sided transform cards, so 25 transform cards in general, or pairs of transform cards, 93 basic cards, including 4 personal starting decks of 8 apprentices and 2 militia, 53 always available cards, including 1 cultist and 26 each of mystic and heavy infantry, the game board, 50 deluxe honor tokens, 25 small clear ones for 1 honor, 25 large red ones for 5 honor, and of course, the game rules. This is definitely a cool one. The transform mechanic is always fun to use. Multi-Unite can be very powerful, and those multi-faction cards can add some interesting gameplay into the mix, though not as much as transform or Multi-Unite, in my opinion. And it is cool that they were able to carry over the transform mechanic that was so popular by making it dependent on situations rather than on energize. Ascension's 8th set, then, was Ascension Dawn of Champions, the first time we actually broke that pattern of a large set being followed by a small set by giving us that second large set. This one does carry over some mechanics back from Realms Unraveled. The transform mechanic doesn't carry over, unfortunately, but the multi-faction concept carries over, and this one introduces more new mechanics that make it feel a little more unique than what we got back with Realms Unraveled. So let's check out the game board here. A little more simply set up. We have our honor pool, a space for that down here at the bottom. We have our 6 spots for the center row. We have our portal deck / center row deck here. We have a space for the banish things here for the void. And we have our always available cards, the cultist, mystic, and heavy infantry, given their spaces. Let's go ahead and load them up. There's your box right there. Dawn of Champions. Dawn of Champions, again, as I said, continues the idea of multi-faction cards, but takes it up a notch when it comes to assigning factions to different things. So, again, we have our standardized new card frames, Same cultist, mystic, heavy infantry, apprentice, and militia as was introduced in Realms Unraveled. We have another kind of card frame to show you here, a trophy monster, which is not something that you see as much in the game at this point, but there is a new card frame for those as well. But when it comes to card types, we can again have multi-faction heroes, an Enlightened Void hero, for instance, in the case of Guide of Lost Souls. But now, we can also have multi-faction constructs, those things that go into play and stay on your side and have a constant effect until they're destroyed somehow. Enlightened, Lifebound construct here for Canopy Sanctuary. It looks very Wookiee-esque, Kashyyyk-esque. We also now have the ability to have monsters that, instead of just being called monsters, have a faction attached, like this Cult of the False Circle, which is a Lifebound monster. So just like if you have something that affects a Lifebound hero or construct card, if it just says Lifebound, in theory it could also trigger off of a Lifebound monster. We also have a new keyword called Rally. When you acquire this, Rally Void, gain 2 combat. Or another way of looking at this, or power, excuse me, I keep saying combat, power in this game. Austere Sage, draw a card. You may banish a card in the center row, then Rally Enlightened. I say, well, okay, so what is Rally? What do we talk about when we talk about rallies if we're not talking about the place that down here in the South they call Checkers to get some good food? What is Rally? Basically, the idea is that, take this one, for example. When you acquire this Rally Void, gain 2 power, right? So I acquire this, and something new is going to flip out into its place. Rally basically means that if what flipped out here was void, at least according to that card, right? Rally Void, I automatically acquire it, and something else flips out into its place. In theory, if you wind up being really, really lucky, and you have a situation in which you have multiple cards of the same type coming out with rally cards always coming out, it can happen quite a bit in a row. But in general, it's a way so that basically you have the possibility of acquiring multiple cards at once simply due to the rally ability of whatever card you're taking first. More importantly, though, this game introduces the champions. The champions have these enormous, from a size standpoint here, enormous cards. And they're dealt out randomly, generally, at the beginning of the game, right? We can have up to 4 players based on the way that these big sets are set up, of course, with enough starting deck stuff for 4 players. We have Dartha, the Enlightened Champion, Nairi, the Lifebound Champion, Kor, the Mechana Champion, and Sadranus, the Void Champion. And these essentially are sitting off on your side of the table as you play. Each one of these is going to give you 2 different situations that allow you to add one what's referred to as reputation token to your side. So in the case of Sadranus, whenever you acquire or defeat a void card from the center row, gain 1 reputation. Once per turn, you may pay 2 runes to gain 1 reputation. You're going to track that reputation with a new little token here, a reputation token, only used in this set. These champions are also only used in this set. Now, each of these has 2 other items on it relating to what you get for hitting certain points of reputation. So once you hit 4 for Sadranus, or 4 for Kor, or 2 for Dartha, or 3 for Nairi, it just depends, the third one kicks in, and the third one gives you a new card directly into your deck that is relatively powerful. So for instance, for the Void, once you hit a reputation of 4, by doing enough of these things to hit 4, then you acquire Sadranus, Dark Servant. These cards are special gray-bound cards, gray-bordered cards, so they don't get confused and stuck inside your center deck. So they get Sadranus, Void Hero, draw 2 cards and discard a card. You may banish a card in your discard pile. Not super powerful, but a decent card. They're also then all set up that when you hit 8, the last one kicks in, so that anytime you acquire or defeat a card of your particular faction, you rally that faction for the center row. So it helps kick in that rally effect much more often. Again, they're not huge game changers, but it gives you more incentive to focus on one type of card, one faction of card, or multi-faction cards that also tie into that faction, so you have a little bit more of a directed form of deck building rather than the randomness that tends to often fit within a deck building game. A lot of people play deck building games and look for powerful cards in general rather than focusing on a particular faction or card type, whereas this is designed around the idea of trying to push you to focus on a particular type. You don't have to, but you get extra benefits from doing so because you're gaining reputation when you do it, you're unlocking that new character to add in as a card in your deck, and of course you're also unlocking that rallying ability throughout the rest of the game. So what do we get? By the numbers in this set, Dawn of Champions, we get 1 game board, we get 4 oversized champion cards, 1 for each faction, 40 reputation tokens to use with those champion cards, 25 1 honor tokens and 25 5 honor tokens, so as we've been seeing, the standard amount of honor tokens of each type, 96 center deck cards, 4 champion hero cards, those are the ones that we get from hitting either 2, 3, or 4 reputation, depending on which faction we're dealing with, 4 starting decks of 10 cards each, 8 apprentices and 2 militia, and 53 always available cards, as has been the case recently, 1 cultist, and 26 each of mystic and heavy infantry. Along with, of course, your game rules for Dawn of Champions. Realms Unraveled and Dawn of Champions are both solid entries into Ascension, both with solid mechanics, but nothing super over the top, despite the fact that stuff like the use of the champions is pretty different than what we've seen before. These sets, however, tend to be overshadowed by the next two, Dreamscape and War of Shadows, which we'll look at in our next episode.